people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy.
The undisputed super featherweight champion of the world, Alicia, the Bumgarner.
That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. It appears that Promociones del Pueblo, based out of Mexico, has intentions of internationalizing their WBC champion, WBC bantamweight champion, Yuli Hang Luna, with a unification match. At this time, at least 2 of the 4 champions at this weight are spoken for. Ebony Bridges is still on the comeback trail after that hand surgery. She's got the IBF. Nina Hughes, newly crowned WBA champion. She's en route to take on former WBA champion Shannon Courtenay. Thus, if it is Yuli Hang Luna's intention to unify with one of the other champions at this weight, the only one left is Denmark's Dina Thorsland, who holds the WBO title. You could argue that Yuli Hang Luna and Dina Thorsland, these are number 1 and number 2 at the weight, more so than Ebony and more so than Nina, because they've been champions longer than those fighters and they have more pro bouts than those fighters.
Those champions, but compared to those champions, compared to Ebony and compared to Nina,
Dina would be a high-risk, low-reward unification match for Yuli Hang Luna because Dina's not with a major promotional outfit like Ebony Bridges,
right,
like Nina Hughes, rather
right,
the winner of Hughes versus Courtenay. So if Yuli Hang Luna is in the market for a unification match, ideally she would be facing one of them. She'd have several tactical advantages over Ebony Bridges and Nina Hughes because she's a more experienced fighter and a longer reigning champion than they are, whereas with Dina, it's a more even fight for less money. It would be. I do not know at this time to what extent Promociones del Pueblo is exploring a unification match for Yuli Hang Luna. Are they already in negotiations with, say, Dina Thorsland, or are they just throwing this out there that Yuli Hang Luna wants to unify, but they haven't
gotten started on that.
Yuli Hang Luna has generous physical dimensions for a bantamweight. She'll be a smidge taller than Ebony Bridges and Nina Hughes.
Yeah.
Bit longer, too. She's some years younger than they are.
Even though she's more experienced than both.
Ebony's got something like 10 pro bouts. Nina's only got 5, whereas Yuli Hang Luna,
she is a veteran of 28 professional contests, 28 professional bouts, a 2-time champion.
not only does she have youth on her side, she has experience on her side. These ain't soccer moms that Yuli Hang Luna has been fighting over the years.
It's strange that the 2 more experienced champions at the weight are also 2 of the younger champions at the weight. Yuli Hang Luna, Dina Thorsland.
They're both 29 years old, the both of them, both Dina and Yuli Hang Luna. They're 2 of the younger champions at this weight, but they're also more experienced than the other 2.
Yuli Hang Luna's promoters saying they're in the market for a unification match, but I wonder how interested they'd be in Dina, because Dina would pose certain challenges to Yuli Hang Luna that the other 2 champions at this weight wouldn't face. You know, Ebony Bridges, she's a come-forward pressure fighter.
Very strong hooks and uppercuts mid-range to inside, looping rights, but she does have slower feet than Yuli Hang Luna. And Yuli Hang, she has experience dealing with come-forward aggressive pressure fighters that like to throw bombs. We saw that in the Miele Flores fight, the 2 fights that she had with Jessica Gonzalez.
Yuli Hang's got experience with fighters like Ebony, but how many fighters like Yuli Hang has Ebony faced?
You can ask that same question about newly crowned WBA champion Nina Hughes. Even if she makes it past Shannon Courtenay, Shannon Courtenay's no Yuli Hang Luna. Nowhere near as experienced, nowhere near as seasoned.
It's the same with Nina, too. Yuli Hang Luna has faster feet and more generous physical dimensions than Nina.
Nina's got to get close to her opponent before she can do anything because she's on the smaller end of of the spectrum as far as bantamweights go. And we've seen Yuli Hang Luna beat those feet, use the ring, and move lateral, put distance between herself and her opponent. So she would have a tactical advantage over Ebony, a tactical advantage over Nina, but not so much with Dina.
Dina's more athletic than the other two.
I think she even rivals Ebony Bridges in terms of power. Dina shoots a leaping left hook to the body that doesn't miss, and I've seen her floor quite a few girls with that same shot.
Dina's more athletic than Ebony, more athletic than Nina, more bouncy.
And just as strong, with more rounds in the bank, more experience, lest we forget. Dina Thorsland is a two-division champion. She held the WBO title at Super Bantamweight and currently holds it at Bantamweight. For Yuli Hang Luna, who's in the market for a unification match, Dina Thorsland would be the more difficult fight. It's the more high-risk, low-reward situation.
At least on paper it is. Who knows what happens if you put both in the ring? I can't call it.
But when the Yuli Hang Luna people say that they're in the market for a unification match, I don't know if they mean Dina. I'd sooner think they mean Nina or Ebony, because those two fighters are with a major promotional outfit that has a major platform deal, whereas Dina's still flying a bit low under the radar.
Will this be the year that unification matches come to the bantamweight division? Because it needs them.
I wouldn't be surprised to see Ebony Bridges and the winner of Hughes versus Courtenay unify with each other, but what about Dina and what about Yuli Hang? What are they going to do this year?
Will they unify?
Or will they wait out the winner of Hughes versus Courtenay / Hughes versus Bridges?
We'll just have to wait and see.
Said up at the press conference that he's been out and about, and it doesn't look like he's in hard training or taking the fight seriously. What do you read into that?
The decline of the Charlo, yeah, the fall and the rise of someone new.
So that fight hopefully towards the back end of this year?
I'll get him at the end of the year. I'll get him.
The longer this fight takes to make, the more it favors the younger, fresher fighter, the more active fighter, who in turn becomes the sharper fighter. Jermell Charlo hasn't fought in a year, you understand, and while stylistically and experience-wise he may have an edge, it doesn't mean much if he sits out for too long.
Ring rust is real.
Against a hungry young up-and-comer who wants to become a champion, you don't want to have to go shaking off ring rust. You don't want to shake off ring rust with a physical fighter, a pressure fighter who sets a high pace like a Tszyu. There are different kinds of pressure fighters. Some pressure fighters apply pressure by way of volume.
They throw punches in bunches and they don't stop until you stop them or they stop you.
Some pressure fighters are better described as ambush fighters. They'll walk down their opponent, stalk their opponent, and once they're in position, they will explode. It's the difference between a Jessica McCaskill and a Christina Lenardatu. They're both pressure fighters, but there are subtle differences.
Tszyu falls somewhere in between. He throws punches in bunches, he does, but he don't just throw punches for the sake of throwing punches. It's punch picking.
It's excellent.
The head shots, the body shots, the uppercuts up the middle that splits the guard, and he has a pressure fighter's pace. That's the telltale sign for a pressure fighter.
If it seems like the guy wants to spend the entirety of the round fighting, that's a good sign that this guy is a pressure guy, and that's Tszyu.
Some fighters want the action to be stop and start, intermittent. Your boxer punchers, your pure boxers.
They have an even slower pace than a boxer puncher. They want to fight long distance, long range, moving lateral, staying outside of the pocket with a guy, just 1 or 2 shots at a time.
The opposite of a pressure fighter. The pressure fighter wants to step into their jab, come forward, let their hands go.
Get off shots mid-range to inside. That's Tszyu.
Whether or not he's limited to just pressure fighting has yet to be determined, because so far nobody's been able to back him off.
Even in the Terrell Gachet fight where Tszyu suffered that early scare, that early knockdown, it didn't discourage him. He got up, stayed in character, and put the squeeze on that guy. Applied pressure and dominated him.
So far, Tim has proven to be a pressure fighter fight by fight. We don't know if he's limited just to that because nobody's forced him to box off the back foot and move lateral.
Very few, if any, fighters want to stay in the pocket with him and stand up to his shots, stand up to his punches. So at least for the time being, he has the look of a mid-range to inside pressure fighter. Jermell Charlo being a boxer puncher, that gives Jermell a stylistic advantage, but what about the physicality?
That has its role to play too. It's been a long time since you had a fight. What's the snap on your punches like? Your timing?
Your cardio? Your engine?
You haven't had to use it in a while.
I think something devastating. Something devastating. I've been envisioning this moment, this fight, something devastating, something that Fundora couldn't do.
That is in reference to the upcoming Carlos Ocampo fight. Carlos Ocampo would serve as a common opponent between Tszyu and Errol Spence Jr., Sebastian Fundora. They both fought that guy.
Errol stopped him.
Stopped him in one round. Sebastian didn't. Sebastian went the distance with him. Even though he won the fight, he didn't make easy work of him. I think Tszyu, I think his performance will be more akin to what we saw in the Spence fight. I think he's going to stop Carlos.
Shouldn't take him lightly. He shouldn't look past him.
He's got to stay on his P's and Q's. Stay in character. And so long as Tim does, I think he can knock out Carlos Ocampo.
You know, Errol Spence did it in devastating fashion when he was young, nice and early in his career with the camper. I want to do something highlight reel status.
Do you have any message for Jermell Charlo? Because clearly that's the man you want to be fighting now, but that's not the case.
Look, I was watching the Garcia Tank fight the other day, and the guy was off his head. He was drunk, you know, and there's a difference between me and him. See me, I'm active.
There's a recent video of Jermell Charlo just lounging around, calling out Canelo Alvarez. To some, he appeared inebriated. He appeared like he was on the sauce. And you have to wonder if this is what Jermell is doing in his downtime. Is he really getting ready for a fight with Tim?
Is he?
Heard somebody say that they're looking to do the fight between Tim and Jermell in August, though on this schedule, think about it. A Charlo fight in August, Tszyu's returning to action June 18th.
Even if he were to come out of the Ocampo fight unscathed, what are we talking about? Late August? Early September?
I'm here staying ready, getting ready for the next opportunity. Every opportunity I get, I'm going to take. Him, on the other hand, he's on honeymoon. He's off to Vegas. He's getting smashed.
Getting sloshed. Calling out Canelo, who campaigns 2 divisions north of where he campaigns. I don't think he's got Tszyu on the brain, and those of you that have been following this channel long enough will have heard me say this before. I don't actually think it's Jermell's intention or the PBC's intention to make that fight with Tim.
I don't think it ever was. I think they were banking on Terrell Gausha beating Tim.
Which would have allowed them, had Terrell Gausha won, to further delay Jermell Charlo's ring return. But when Tim beat the guy,
they don't have control of all the pieces on the board.
The longer it takes Jermell Charlo to return to action, the less likely it seems to me that he's going to fight Tim.
Fight Tim in his next fight.
Doesn't look very likely.
You know, there's a difference, and when we do meet, it's going to be trouble, not for me, but for him.
Is he going to fight you?
That's the question you got to ask him, man.
Talk about the Gold Coast for a moment, because I know you love this part of the world. You've spent a lot of time here in training camps. You were based here for a little while, and you seem to have a great deal of enjoyment about the place.
Yeah, it's got this vibe here. Gold Coast, we spent 2 months here before Jeff Horn. Before then, it was the Queensland versus New South Wales rivalry. You know, this time I'm coming here, and it's like I feel like the whole nation's behind me, you know, and it's not just Queensland, it's every state, and it's a good place here on the Gold Coast to have this type of fight, and we promised with No Limit to bring a big fight here, and we finally got it, you know, so I'm grateful for this opportunity.
The reality is that Tszyu and Jermell Charlo may not fight, but the best thing that could happen to junior middleweight at this point is at least one of those titles changing hands, with or without a Charlo fight, because it's not good for the division, good for the weight class, that the guy holding all the belts has sat out for the last 12 months, irrespective of why.
Doesn't matter why.
He's got all the belts, so that means nobody gets a title shot till he comes back. And how does that create excitement and get attention to the junior middleweight division? How does it do it?
It's not good for the sport.
Tszyu has an entire country behind him. Jermell Charlo doesn't. While you can argue that the American market is a much bigger market than the Australian one, it ain't worth nothing if the guy ain't fighting.
The American guy.
Domestically, Tszyu has more of a following in Australia than Jermell has in America.
And his rate of activity is not hampered by the constraints of Showtime, and what they're going through right now is a platform.
Sorry to say that WBO needs to hurry up and strip Jermell Charlo of the brown belt, of the WBO title. Let him keep the others and decide what he wants to do, but that one really should go to Tim.
Can't keep this guy waiting forever.
Truth is, Errol, you should thank me. If I fought you when you called me out, when you was nobody, you got paid nobody money. You fight Keith Thurman today, you make more money than Keith Thurman. So I think wherever Keith Thurman is, you should probably thank him. Wherever he is, you You should probably say thanks, champ. You know, I knew that big fights have to be built up. It's one of those small things that sometimes the fans don't like. But big fights need to be built up.
All that really means is that the reason Keith Thurman didn't fight Errol Spence Jr. sooner is because he didn't want to. And to that, Errol Spence Jr. himself stated, "Stop listening to that goofy," posting an image of himself holding the IBF.
He had just won it.
Jeff Horn, he was WBO champion at the time, and Keith Thurman, he was a unified champion at the time. This is well before Terrence Crawford moved up to welterweight and took the brown belt from Jeff Horn, characterizing what it is Spence is talking about, that before it became about Spence versus Crawford, it was already about Spence versus Thurman.
Keith Thurman had that fight with Danny Garcia, that unification match, and it took him close to 2 years to return to the ring.
In that time, that's when Terrence Crawford ended up moving up in weight and taking the WBO title from Jeff Horn. It quickly became about Crawford versus Spence instead of Thurman versus Spence because Thurman was missing in action.
That's right.
Comes back, has 2 fights, loses to Manny Pacquiao, takes another 2 years off. See,
Look.
if Keith Thurman finds himself in this predicament to where he's no longer relevant to the welterweight division in all the ways that he was years prior,
It's all that time off.
whatever he was, he ain't that no more. And if he was relevant in the past to the division, he's not relevant here today. Here today, the only fight to make at 147 is the Crawford fight. And Errol Spence Jr., in so many words, that's what he said in a recent interview. He doesn't want to fight anybody else. He wants to fight Terrence.
Nobody cares about Keith Thurman.
He ended up unifying titles with Danny. Took close to 2 years for him to come back to the ring. He comes back, he loses to Manny Pacquiao, takes another 2 years off.
Another 2 years. Comes back, fights Mario Barrios, takes the rest of the year off.
It's been over a year since Keith Thurman's last fight. He's supposed to be Errol Spence Jr.'s mandatory challenger by way of the WBC, but rumor has it they're working on the Crawford fight.
Inactivity killed Keith Thurman's career.
It's not because he lost one fight to Manny Pacquiao. It's not because he has a loss in the column. It's because the man doesn't fight. You could argue that Keith Thurman has been an injury-prone fighter the last couple of years. It's always something.
The year he fought Sean Porter, that's the only fight he had that year. The year he fought Danny, same thing.
And that's when he peaked. That was at the height of Keith Thurman's popularity. It's been a downward spiral since then.
But is he right, though? Was he right to make Errol Spence Jr. wait?
Depends on how you look at it. The PBC and Showtime were on more stable ground years ago than they are here today. Their budget now isn't what it was way back when Keith was unified.
They had more money to play back then.
More money to spend. And if Keith Thurman doesn't get to challenge Errol for the 3 alphabet titles he holds, then no, it wasn't wise to wait him out.
Because you didn't get anything out of it.
Keith's contention is that he prolonged the fight to allow it to grow. But grow into what?
There's no fight. If there's no fight, it didn't grow into anything.
You know, he wanted Danny Garcia as soon as Danny Garcia arrived in the men's welterweight division, but he didn't have that energy for Errol Spence Jr. He didn't have that energy for Kell Brock either, who was IBF champion before Spence took his belt.
He didn't want to fight Spence back then because he knew he might lose.
And he still might lose all these years later, but all these years later, Keith Thurman is a quasi-retired fighter that's ready to cash out. He's just looking for one more big payday.
He has no buzz.